never thought I would have to leave my country to save my wife. But here I am, on a plane to Switzerland, with a suitcase full of cash and a desperate hope. She's been pregnant for 2 years, and no one knows why. The doctors have tried everything, from ultrasounds to MRIs, but they can't see what's inside her. They can't even tell if it's a baby or something else. Something I hope is just a complication from such a long term. My wife and I had different views on having children. She had a hereditary condition that made pregnancy very difficult and dangerous for her, but she also had a strong desire to be a mother. She grew up as an only child and felt lonely. She wanted to have a big family and give her children the love and attention she craved. I loved my wife and wanted to support her, but I also worried about her health and well-being. I thought about adopting children who needed a home and a family. I thought that would be a safer and more compassionate option. We talked about it and agreed to try for a baby, even though it was risky and painful for her. But when she made it into her second trimester, it was a blessing. I thought I was ready for fatherhood. I had a stable job, a loving wife, and a cozy home. I was overjoyed. But the pregnancy didn't progress normally. Discomfort and pain became her constant companions. Morning sickness, fatigue, backaches, swelling, changes in sleep patterns, and other bodily changes made her miserable and exhausted. But that was nothing compared to the fear and anxiety that gripped me every day. She didn't show any signs of growth. She didn't feel any movement except for pain. She didn't hear any heartbeat except for silence. And the doctors didn't know what was wrong. We hoped for a miracle, but we got a nightmare. Work-life balance was a joke. I could barely manage to get through the day, let alone support her and our baby. I felt guilty for working too much, but I also felt guilty for not earning enough. I tried to prepare for parenthood, but I had no idea what to expect or how to cope. I felt alone and overwhelmed. Financial strain added to the stress. Medical bills piled up and we had to dip into our savings. We worried about how we would afford maternity leave, childcare, and all the other expenses that come with having to perform so many tests. We had to cut back on everything, and we still barely made ends meet and make sure there would be no way miscarriage could happen. Relationship stresses tested our bond. Pregnancy can put strain on any relationship, but ours was pushed to the limit. We argued more than ever, and we struggled to communicate and understand each other. We tried to be supportive and loving, but we also felt frustrated and resentful. It's been 730 days. Not days of morning sickness and cute baby bumps, but 730 days of a swollen belly, endless doctor's appointments, and a growing chasm between me and my wife. It started normally enough. Positive test, excitement, planning for the tiny human on the way. But then, at month 9, something went wrong. The bump kept growing, but no heartbeat, no kicks, just an unsettling emptiness. Doctors were baffled. Scans showed nothing but shadows. Freaky shadows that sent chills down my spine. New laws came in, shutting down any hope of invasive procedures. No termination, no poking around to see what the hell was going on. We were stuck with this thing, growing inside my wife, stealing her life, and slowly poisoning ours. We tried everything, every specialist, every clinic, even lawmakers, all brick walls of apathy and legalese. No one cared that this wasn't normal, that her stomach was pushing against its limits, her legs and feet swollen like balloons. And every scan, every prod, every cold touch on her belly, it felt like scraping ice against my soul. We used to be close, whispering dreams of the future. Now, the silence between us is deafening, punctuated only by her strained breaths and the creaking of the house settling in the dead of night. Sometimes I stare at that monstrous bulge and wonder what it is, but I do worry more about my wife and how this all feels for her. I just wanted it to stop, and so did she. Whatever this was, it was stealing our lives, even if it means silence, even if it means emptiness. And so I found myself on a plane to Switzerland with a suitcase full of cash and a desperate hope. She sat beside me asleep, But I soon noticed something along her stretched-out shirt. A seemingly glossy steel shell had pierced through a skin. We met a doctor at the airport who took us to a secluded facility. He said he had a solution, but it came with a price. "She might not make it," the doctor said. "I can't survive any longer," my wife said. So the procedure began. Dr. Petrov, a grizzled man, prepped our makeshift operating room. My wife, pale and fragile on the makeshift table, held my hand tighter than she ever had, her knuckles white against mine. "Ready?" Petrov's voice rasped, a surgeon's mask obscuring his face. My throat squeezed shut. "For what?" "To pull back the curtain," he said, the glint of the angle grinder blade catching the sunlight. "For answers, even if they're not the ones you want." I nodded, the lump in my throat immovable. Answers, any answers, were better than the gnawing void of the past 2 years. The whirring of the grinder sliced through the silence, a mechanical shriek that sent shivers down my spine. It bit into my wife's flesh, the smell of burning iron filling the air. I squeezed her hand, a silent mantra of, "It's okay, it's okay," bouncing against the walls of my skull. Time morphed into a sickening blend of blood, bone, and metallic tang. Petrov worked with a grim efficiency, a sculptor chipping away at a grotesque statue. Every groan from my wife, every tremor of her body, was a fresh jolt of agony. Then, a gasp. Dr. Petrov held up a piece of warped metal, its edges catching the light like a twisted halo. It pulsed faintly, an alien heartbeat in the sterile room. "My God!" Petrov breathed, his voice raw. "A shell, wrapped around her spine." My world shattered. A metal shell? Inside her? The phantom pregnancy, the cold void under her skin. It all made a horrifying sense. We weren't carrying a child. We were carrying... this. My wife whimpered, eyes wide with a primal fear that mirrored my own. Her hand, slick with sweat, slipped from mine. I reached for her, but Petrov pushed me back, his face grim. "We need to remove it," he said, his voice tight. "Now." But as the grinder whined back to life, a new terror bloomed in the air, a metallic hum emanating from the shell itself. It pulsed, it resonated, before it slowly retracted its tentacles from my wife's spine, pushing itself out her to roll over to the floor as Petrov remained shocked. My wife lay still, her eyes empty, a vessel emptied of such a heavy thing. As I looked down and touched the shell, Petrov begged I stop, but I had to know what we had been dealing with. The shell gently opened and I wondered what to expect. Until I met a beautiful baby girl, but her eyes weren't right. They still aren't. She's growing up quickly since that last week. She can talk now, and she really does love us, even helping her mom through her recovery. But I don't know if she's really mine. But what else can she be? I never imagined that one sentence could terrify me so much. I'm sitting in my living room shaking and listening to the tape on my Walkman over and over again. I don't understand what's going on. Maybe you can help me. It all started last night when I was spending the evening with some friends. There was Sam, a childhood friend, and his girlfriend Olivia. Cedric, a friend I'd made at work who, despite his shyness at parties like this, was very smart. And finally Brad and Mia, a couple of friends I'd known for years, who'd already started arguing on the road, considering the look on their faces when they arrived, and didn't seem to want to discuss it. "Wait, what's this?" said Sam, pointing to the Walkman on one of my shelves. He stood up and grabbed it. "A Walkman? Are you serious? I didn't know you'd become a hipster," he said, laughing. "It's nothing, just a cool thing I bought a few days ago at a flea market. I've linked it to these speakers. But forget it, it doesn't work anyway." "Really?" And with that, he pressed the play button. I already knew what we were going to hear. At least that's what I thought at the time. "Tell me, baby, why don't love me? Tell me, baby." "Wow, that's incredible. I didn't know you could record recent music with that. I've been listening to this music on a loop for days," said Sam enthusiastically. I was speechless. I've been trying to fix this Walkman since the day I bought it. It already had a cassette inside when I'd bought it, and for some reason no other audio cassette would work. And even the original cassette that worked a little bit only repeated the same thing over and over. Too bad. I wish we could have a little more fun together. I asked Sam to give me back the Walkman so I could have a look at it. Maybe he'd pressed something unintentionally and it had fixed it. I rewound the tape to the beginning and pressed play. "Too bad. I wish we could have a little more fun together," said the charming voice of a man. "Well, it looks like you've got an admirer," Olivia teased me. I explained that since I'd bought it, the only original cassette that worked had been repeating that same phrase over and over again, and that this was the first time I'd heard this song from it. "Weird," Olivia admitted. She picked up the Walkman and tried to press play herself. "Tell me, baby, why don't love me? Tell me, baby." I took it back, rewound the tape, and pressed play. The same smooth voice repeated the phrase I'd always heard. "Cedric, you know a thing or two about electronics. Couldn't you take a look?" I handed him the Walkman. He looked at it from every angle, puzzled but still trying to come up with some kind of explanation. He finally pressed play in turn. "I love you," said an old woman's voice. "Wow, it's getting hotter and hotter," joked Olivia. The three of us took turns picking up the Walkman, and inexplicably, the cassette played something different, but still the same for each person, for all of us, apart from Olivia and Sam, who were hearing the same music. After a while, even Olivia started to feel uncomfortable. Sam thought I was playing a joke on them, but it wasn't hard to demonstrate that no trickery was possible, especially with a retro device like that. Brad and Mia, who had remained silent all evening, apart from a few murderous glances exchanged between them, had started to take an interest in the discussion. "Would you like to try it?" I offered, Walkman in hand. Brad took the Walkman. We had all moved forward in our seats, curious to hear what was about to happen. After a brief glance at us, he pressed play. "You fucking cheater." After recoiling from the tenfold increase in volume, we all slowly turned our heads towards Mia, who was standing right next to Brad. It was her voice we'd just heard screaming. "What the fuck is this shit? Where did you buy it? Seriously, you've been fucking with us since the beginning of this evening, I'm sure. How did you do that? Did you use some software on your computer?" spouted Mia in a rage. I didn't know what to say. I was as helpless as she was to explain why we just heard her screaming as he played the tape. She snatched it out of Brad's hands and pressed play. Her enraged voice came out of the speakers again. Her face went white. "Okay, I've had enough of this bullshit. Let's get out of here." After that, Brad and Mia left. I couldn't do anything but apologize to Brad for the way the evening had turned out. I put the Walkman away and had a few beers with Sam, Olivia, and Cedric, who had stayed. But clearly the evening had taken a turn for the worse. We were all puzzled and still stuck on what we'd heard. "Maybe it's the future we're hearing," Sam said. "I mean, considering how often they bicker, it wouldn't surprise me if that's the case for them," Olivia added. "If it's the future, I don't know which one, because it definitely wasn't my grandmother's voice I heard," said Cedric. There was silence. After a moment, everyone stood up, bringing a premature end to the evening that had definitely not gone as I had planned. I invited Sam and Olivia to sleep over, knowing they had some driving to do, but as usual, they declined. I told them to be careful, then waved goodbye to Cedric, who still seemed lost in thought. That night, I fell asleep with an uneasy feeling, and the certainty that I'd better throw away the Walkman first thing in the morning and forget the whole thing. When I woke up, I fumbled for my cell phone on my bedside table, but couldn't find it. I found it forgotten on the living room table and saw that I'd received dozens of texts and calls during the night. I couldn't make any sense of them. A voicemail had been left by a number I didn't have in my contacts. "This is Sam's mom. I can't reach you. Sam and Olivia were in a terrible car accident last night. They didn't make it." I stared at the wall in front of me, incredulous as Sam's mom sobbed into the recording. She was clearly having a breakdown. There was nothing left of the car. The truck ran a red light, apparently. There was only the car radio that kept repeating the same music over and over. I could hear it in the background when the ambulance was there. And the words she uttered next made my blood run cold. "Tell me, baby, why don't love me? Tell me, baby." I threw my cell phone on the floor. It was too obvious to be a coincidence. I'd already started to have doubts when I'd heard Mia's voice screaming with such rage. A murderous rage. I've been pressing play and rewinding the tape for hours. Too bad. I wish we could have a little more fun together. And every time I hear this phrase, I feel as if the suave voice of this man I don't know is becoming more and more malevolent. I shouldn't have sat in the front seat. I shouldn't have gotten into the car in the first place. But I definitely shouldn't have sat in the front seat. In my defense, I did put up resistance. When he told me to sit in the front, I mumbled something about preferring to sit in the back. I had been drinking. I was just looking for a quiet ride back home. "But you'll have no proper view from back there," Ginglick said, watching me in the rear view. "Come sit in the front, I insist." So I did. I got out of the car, stumbled a couple steps forward, and then made a terrible mistake. "So," the driver started as if we were rudely interrupted from a previous conversation. "I trust you've been having a wonderful night. What a beauty that Prague is around Christmas, eh? All the lights and the snow and the music and the trams. A true beauty. Be careful with that mulled wine, though. Terrible for the teeth." "Terrible for the teeth," Ginglick repeated, and tapped his teeth. "Terrible." Him putting his hands in his mouth is what truly scared me. That's when I was almost certain getting into the car was a mistake. I thought the man was on the verge of snapping, and I had signed up for a 20-minute ride across the city with him. This was before I went to the forums. This was before I read the other accounts. I didn't know this happens all the time. For a moment he seemed preoccupied with his teeth, and I tried using that moment to fish out my earbuds. But Ginglick quickly wrapped me into conversation. He started asking about my dental history, whether I wore braces or whether I floss regularly. I had hoped that perhaps he might have just been a dentist. A really lonely dentist who drives nights and probably isn't doing great in his private life. I answered Ginglick's questions as curtly as possible and hoped for a speedy ride. That night, almost all the traffic lights leading to Zlisin were green. I was happy for the speed, but the longer I listened to the driver speak, the more I wanted to get out of the car. His cheery mood quickly faded as Ginglick started to speak of teeth. The man kept his eyes to the road, but he was giving a zealous sermon. According to my Uber driver, teeth were the greatest, if not the only, true judge of character. "They are the only bone we grow for ourselves," he said. "They are the only bone we truly deserve." He was definitely breaking traffic laws. I don't drive and I was pretty drunk, but Ginglick was definitely not driving safe. Just like all the reports from Paris to LA have suggested, the tooth Uber is never a calm ride. Half of the drivers in this city are missing at least one tooth. They just don't care about them. They threw them away. Ginglick raged as he overtook one of the bright Christmas trams. And the Ministry of Transportation won't do anything about it. Not a thing. Oh, how this country has abandoned Havel's ideals. You can of course be assured that I still have all of my teeth. My Uber driver assuring me he has all of his teeth is what made me reach for the seatbelt. I wanted to unbuckle so that I could run off at the nearest red light. He didn't like that. "Don't do that," he said, shifting his eyes from the road. "You need your seatbelt. Safety first. No airbags in this car." The car wasn't going to stop. We were flying through yellows. Ginglick seemed to be wholly confused by my concern about the airbags. "Ah," he said as he turned his attention to the sharp turn off Radlika. "Maybe you haven't heard. Most airbags will knock out your teeth. Dangerous technology. Pointless, if you ask me. Were we not speeding down my neighborhood, and was I not drunk, I would have jumped out of the car. But we were so close. I thought the terrible ride was about to end. Yet it was far from over. "Oh, I can just get out over here," I said, the moment the car came to a stop. It was the last red light from my place. Just a brisk 3-minute walk. "Oh no," I insist. He grabbed my hand. He wasn't going to let me unbuckle my seatbelt. "We're almost at your destination, and most importantly, you haven't even counted my teeth yet." For a moment he smiled, but then, like a wild animal about to consume its prey, he opened his jaw. I laughed. It's the only thing I could manage. Ginglick, however, wasn't joking. "Count my teeth," he said, his voice cold. "Count them out loud so I can hear too. Count them out loud so I know I have them all." He turned on the side light so that I could see better. He opened his mouth so I could count better. His hand was still wrapped around my wrist. Not knowing what else to do, I started to count. Even after the light turned green, even after I lost count, Ginglick would not move the car. He told me to count from the start again. He told me to make sure he has all his teeth. I counted. I counted because the look in the driver's eyes told me he would bite me if I didn't. When we arrived at my apartment, Ginglick started to deliver some long-winded lecture about dental hygiene, but I sprinted out of that car like my life depended on it. Reading the other reports, I don't think that's too far of a long shot. I didn't stay in the car. Ginglick didn't try to take out my teeth like so many tooth-ubers around the world do. Theoretically, I'm safe. Only theoretically, though. By the time I was in my elevator, my phone dinged. An email from Tooth-Uber. It looked just like the regular bills that I receive from regular rides, but instead of a billed amount, it said something else. "Thank you for riding with us. The total for your ride is 1 tooth. It's been 3 days. I've read so many other reports of people who had experiences just like me. I've made some level of peace with what happened to me that night. The one thing that all of those reports lack, however, the one thing that terrifies me is this. I fear how Ginglick will try to claim his payment."